imagining it. You've got this booming silver town, guns everywhere, and in the middle of it all, a saloon that somehow feels curated, like a velvet rope in a powder keg. How did Milt Joyce pull that off?
You're absolutely right to be intrigued by that. The fascinating aspect is that the Oriental wasn't just a bar, it was a social engine. Joyce designed it to attract the elite, wealthy miners, lawmen, even notorious figures. He imposed order because, paradoxically, discipline was the only way to make chaos profitable.
So, essentially what you're saying is the Oriental was more like a boardroom in disguise. Mahogany, clinking glasses, and whispered deals. Not just whiskey and piano noise, but a place where Tombstone's power network coagulated.
Exactly. Think of it like an algorithm of human behavior. Joyce's approach, monitor, intervene, escalate only if necessary, was simple, but it stabilized revenue. High-end clientele spend more when they feel safe. He turned hospitality into a kind of frontier governance inside four walls.
Let me make sure I understand this correctly. He's running a security protocol that's half etiquette and half self-defense. Bartenders like William Parker are basically peacekeepers with bar towels until they need to be something else entirely.
Yes, and here's the intriguing part. Those bartenders, that staff, they're the saloon's nervous system. They read the room, intercept small sparks before they become wildfires. That's how Joyce preserved the Oriental's aura of controlled indulgence in a town where the street outside could turn lethal by nightfall.
Okay, but here's what I'm curious about. If your customers include Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and Doc Holliday, doesn't your threat model explode? You want the prestige, but prestige arrives holstered.
What's truly remarkable is that Joyce embraced that paradox. The very people who could wreck the place gave it its gravitational pull. By keeping them inside a code, his code, he made the Oriental a microcosm of the town's hierarchy, where proximity to danger translated to influence and profit.
Ooh, that's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. It's like running a high-voltage lab. If you isolate the current properly, you can harness immense power. If not, you get smoke and lawsuits.
Let me illustrate this, and this is based on the realities of frontier business. Imagine a simple equation. Revenue equals patron volume times average spend minus incident costs. Joyce's entire philosophy works to minimize the last term without deflating the first two. That's the economics of elegance under duress.
Students listening to this while walking to class, this is literally risk management. It's the same logic you'd use in finance or operations, just with more mustaches and revolvers.
And here's an even more intriguing aspect. The Oriental amplified Tombstone's political weather. Deals, alliances, and grudges incubated at those tables. The saloon became an unofficial city hall, where influence was traded with chips and eye contact.
So not just a place to drink, but a place where the town rehearsed its future. That actually reframes the entire saloon trope from dusty cliché to urban planning lab.
Precisely. The scale is small, a single room really, but the implications are vast. The Oriental shows how institutions, no matter how informal, shape civic life. It's the beauty of emergent order. Out of noise, you get a signal.
Wait, quick question. Did Joyce actually arm himself? Like, was the boss behind the bar also the bouncer with a badge he made up himself?
He did. He enforced the rules, and he was ready to defend them. That was crucial. If you're perceived as soft, your place hemorrhages status. Joyce's authority was both spoken and, when necessary, loud.
The syllabus for Oriental 101. Hospitality, accounting, psychology, and ballistics. Okay, take me into that night. The 1880 incident with Doc Holliday. How does a bartender's job become a gunfight in under a minute?
So here's the fascinating sequence. Holliday is intoxicated and disruptive. Joyce and bartender William Parker eject him. Minutes later, Holliday returns with a revolver. Shots are fired, Parker is seriously wounded, Joyce is grazed, and Joyce shoots Holliday in the leg. Fast, chaotic, and grimly procedural.
Oh, That escalation curve is terrifying. From customer service to trauma care in what, 60 seconds?
The scale of time is extraordinary. Think, a few exchanges of words, a shove through the batwing doors, then a re-entry and muzzle flash. In that compressed timeline, Joyce's policy, contain, eject, defend, gets stress tested by a man with a reputation for volatility.
This might be a fundamental question, but what does authority even mean when a patron can just come back with a gun? Doesn't that invalidate the whole management model?
It reveals the boundary. Authority holds only while the social contract holds. When that's broken, you move into deterrence, swift response to preserve the saloon's sovereignty. Joyce firing back is the grim punctuation that reasserts order after its rupture.
So it wasn't some Shakespearean duel, more like a failed compliance procedure. Wrong place, wrong moment, wrong man with a bottle and a gun.
You're absolutely right to frame it that way. Accounts vary in the details, but the consensus is simple. Holliday's belligerence catalyzed a chain reaction. Joyce responded as a proprietor defending his premises, not as a rival seeking a showdown.
How did researchers actually discover that sequence? Newspaper accounts? County records? Eyewitness testimony is messy even now, let alone with kerosene lamps and adrenaline.
This is where it becomes particularly interesting. You triangulate from local reports, legal documents, and later recollections. Despite the fog, you find recurring anchors: the ejection, the return with a gun, the injuries, the retaliatory shot. The pattern remains steady even as details blur at the edges.
The implications of that are wild. A single minute alters reputations, fractures alliances, and maybe nudges Tombstone a few degrees toward the OK Corral.
Exactly. The ripple effects include intensified distrust among factions, more eyes on gamblers, and a heightened readiness to interpret every insult as an omen. The Oriental's reputation survives, but it now glows with powder burns at the edges.
For context, that 1880 clash is often cited as an early spark in tensions that culminated in the 1881 OK Corral gunfight.
Okay, so from a study perspective, if you're prepping for an exam on frontier governance, you could treat this as a case study in incident escalation. Trigger, response, outcome, ripple. Then map the stakeholders.
Yes, and here's the existential moment. In places like Tombstone, institutions were people. When a man like Joyce stood his ground, he wasn't just protecting a bar, he was asserting a model for how order could exist. Fragile, fallible, but real, amid a culture that romanticized the opposite.
So, going back to the idea that the Oriental was a shadow city hall, Joyce actually becomes a literal civic leader, right? Chairman of the Cochise County Board of Supervisors?
He does, and it's a beautiful feedback loop. The saloon's networks grant social capital. The board role gives formal power. He helps shape policy on infrastructure and law enforcement, exactly the levers that make saloons safer and towns more stable. That's frontier symbiosis in action.
Let me test a model. If institutions equal people, then budgets equal values. The roads you build, the deputies you hire, that's your ethics rendered in ledgers.
That's precisely how I like to conceptualize it. In a county board meeting, you codify your philosophy. Do you invest in order or leave it to chance? Joyce's trajectory suggests he believed in engineered stability because he'd seen the cost of the alternatives spill onto his own floorboards.
And then he shifts into mining? That feels like a pivot from service economics to resource extraction, the classic frontier graduation ceremony.
Exactly. Mining offers longer-term, higher-stakes returns if you can navigate geology and markets. Joyce leverages his capital and contacts into claims and operations. It's risk, but not the daily risk of a bar brawl. It's portfolio risk, geological uncertainty measured in shafts and assays.
So a rough equation, profit equals ore yield times price minus extraction costs and claim disputes and accidents. It's basically a stochastic function with boots and lanterns.
Beautifully put. And remember the location problem. Remote sites magnify every cost. Joyce's success here shows adaptability. He translates the Oriental's situational awareness into strategic planning underground and in the county books above ground.
Ooh, that's a useful exam angle. Show how competencies transfer. Conflict de-escalation at a bar becomes stakeholder management on a board, becomes labor coordination in a mine.
And here's the existential flourish. In the absence of mature institutions, character stands in. Joyce's story is a study in how personality and policy intermingle to create the fragile architecture we later call civilization.
Okay, can we get nerdy for a second? If I were cramming for a midterm on frontier economics, how would I formalize Joyce's business logic without flattening the romance out of it?
Let's keep the romance, because that's the point. But here's a simple frame. Revenue equals patron volume times average spend, minus incident costs. Volume depends on reputation for order. Spend rises with elite clientele. Incident costs skyrocket with guns, egos, and whiskey.
So the Oriental is essentially a marketplace for trust. You're selling the expectation that you'll leave richer in coin or connections, and with all your blood still inside you.
Exactly. And Joyce's interventions, employing staff like Parker as sentinels, act like hedges against tail risks. Most nights nothing happens, but the one night it does, your survival depends on those hedges firing instantly and decisively.
Have you considered the broader implications of this for modern spaces, nightclubs, stadiums, even online platforms? Moderation is the business model.
That's a brilliant connection. The Oriental is a 19th century content platform. Curate high-value contributors, enforce community standards, escalate only when necessary. The difference is that in Tombstone, a terms of service violation could come with gunsmoke.
Somewhere, a product manager is whispering, "We need a Milt Joyce for our comments section."
And here's the part that gets me. The Oriental shows that robust order isn't dour, it's an invitation. Think of a string quartet in a storm. If the tent holds, the music can soar. Joyce built the tent.
That's genuinely beautiful and weirdly practical. I'm picturing a test question. Discuss how frontier saloons functioned as proto-institutions, citing the Oriental's enforcement protocol and clientele strategy.
If that's the prompt, your thesis is stability as strategy. Use the Oriental to show how order converts volatility into value. Then bring in the holiday incident as a stress test that, though costly, reinforced Joyce's authority.
This is really challenging my understanding. I grew up with the myth that saloon owners were just cash registers and aprons. No policy, no principle, just coin and chaos.
And that's the misconception. Joyce wasn't a passive profiteer. He actively imposed civility, ejecting disruptors, carrying a gun for defense, not because he fancied violence, but because order is the beating heart of a viable business in a volatile town.
So the wrong take is opportunist leech, and the right take is reluctant institution builder with a revolver.
Beautifully distilled. And consider the cost. You make enemies by enforcing standards. Joyce's injuries weren't incidental. They were occupational hazards of building a bubble of civilization in a landscape predisposed to burst it.
Fun fact, the Oriental's prestige drew both lawmen and outlaws. Exactly the mix that required strong in-house rules to prevent costly incidents.
That duality keeps coming back. The very prestige that pays your bills also loads the dice against you. It's like gravitational lensing. The mass draws light but bends it dangerously.
A gorgeous analogy. The saloon's mass, its reputation, warps the town's social space. Joyce's genius was to make that curvature predictable, so patrons could navigate without falling into the event horizon of a brawl.
Okay, circling back, how did the Oriental's social web feed into Joyce's role on the county board? Was it just fame, or did he run on policy?
It was credibility born from competence. People saw a man who could hold a room that shouldn't be holdable. On the board, that translated into budget oversight and infrastructure decisions, roads, schools, policing, the fundamentals of civilization in a place that desperately needed them.
So a practical exam move here would be compare informal authority, Saloon, and formal authority, county board, showing how both types rely on resource allocation and enforcement capacity.
Yes, and if you want to make it vivid, remind yourself, a road is a promise that tomorrow will come. In the saloon, Joyce built tomorrow one quiet night at a time. In government, he tried to pave it, literally and figuratively.
Do we know specifics about budget priorities or ordinances he backed, or is that beyond the surviving records?
The broad strokes are clearest: chairmanship, oversight roles, influence during the town's formative years. But the essence stands. He moved the levers that define safety and growth, drawing on experience earned the hard way at the Oriental's rail.
Okay, let's jump tracks. Joyce leaves Tombstone for California. That feels almost poetic, like stepping out of a storm into a room with actual windows. Why did he go?
Pragmatism. The frontier's volatility intensifies. The risks don't align with the stability he clearly values. California offers a calmer market to apply the same entrepreneurial toolkit, hospitality, networks, financial sense, without the nightly odds of a gunfight reshuffling your plans.
Let me see if I get this. The real winners of the West might be the ones who knew when to leave, who could pivot from romance to returns.
That's a compelling thesis. Joyce embodies resilience through adaptation. He gathered capital and lessons in Tombstone, then repurposed them in a more stable ecosystem. He dies in 1889, not in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet continuation of enterprise.
There's something profoundly human about that. We mythologize the bang, but life is mostly pivot and persist.
And here's the existential moment, if you'll permit one. Civilization advances not only through heroic duels, but through quiet decisions to relocate, reinvest, and reimagine. Joyce, in Leaving, tells us that survival is a kind of genius.
So, if I'm writing a paper, I want a sentence that captures this. Tombstone needed the Oriental because... Finish that for me.
Because it converted volatility into value. The Oriental aggregated capital, information, and status, and then containerized risk. It gave the town a room where dangerous people could act predictably, which is just another way of saying society.
That's remarkable. The implications of that are, well, modern. We still build rooms where we can behave predictably. Boardrooms, courts, classrooms. The Oriental was an early adapter. And here's the weirder reveal. A saloon owner becomes a de facto law enforcer because formal structures lag behind need. Joyce's establishment foreshadows the institutions a maturing town will later formalize through ordinances and budgets.
Actually, I just looked it up, and Joyce's civic posts align with Tombstone's peak growth years, right when informal power needed formal structure.
Oh, so the Oriental wasn't just entertainment. It was a prototype for governance, a place where norms rehearsed and later became laws.
Exactly. The bar top becomes a bench, the bouncer becomes a deputy, the crabbed ledger becomes a budget. It's the slow alchemy of order, and Joyce is one of its early artisans in Tombstone.
I keep thinking about Parker's wounds and Joyce's grays. Flesh and blood realities. How do we avoid turning these people into chess pieces when their nights were terrifyingly real?
By dwelling in the human texture, imagine the room's hush after the bullets, the way breath returns raggedly, the mop bucket that follows the myth. History is made of those private minutes after the legend ends and the cleaning begins.
That hits. And it explains why Joyce's later choice to find quieter markets reads less like retreat and more like wisdom.
Wisdom, yes, and a legacy that's subtle. Not every architect signs the building, but when you walk through Tombstone's history, you find his fingerprints on the beams, in the Saloon's protocols, in county minutes, in the very idea that order is worth defending.
Okay, so going back to the first thing you said, the Oriental as a social engine, if we connect that to the gunfight and then to Joyce's governance and exit, what's the big lesson?
Here it is, cleanly. Joyce's life shows that civilization is engineered at the edge. Start with a room where dangerous people feel safe. Add a leader who can translate that micro-order into policy. Survive a test by fire. Then, when the balance tilts, move on with your principles intact.
Wow, that's a framework I can use. Students, if you're outlining commerce, control, crisis, civic power, calculated exit, each arrow is cause and effect.
And the existential coda. The Old West wasn't only duels at dusk. It was also spreadsheets in candlelight, ledgers and laws, stitched by people like Milt Joyce, who believed that a quiet night is worth fighting for.
One last thing. How might Tombstone have differed without Joyce?
Counterfactuals are tricky, but imagine a town with fewer curated spaces, more street conflict, and weaker bridges between commerce and government. The Oriental's model may have prevented a dozen small disasters we'll never read about because they didn't happen.
The anti-headlines. Nothing happened again at the Oriental. Frankly, that's the civilization I want.
Me too, because in that quiet, the town grows. And somewhere, a miner makes a deal, a deputy relaxes his grip, and a bartender named Parker hangs up his apron with both hands intact. That's a triumph, however small.